Welcome everyone from the Spring 2025 Sketching Retreat created by David Drizil. David, hi to yourself. This is that first video that goes with the video that we showed at the retreat that shows how we set up Procreate to work for scale, to draw at scale. The reason we're doing that is because we're basically showing you how Procreate and SketchUp work together, and more specifically how Procreate and SketchUp together unlock a level of freedom and creativity that's hard to achieve with just a keyboard and a mouse. It's the best of both worlds, precision where you need it and creativity when you want it. I hope you enjoy the video. Now, step one is to set up a new canvas and start with a template and scale ruler to ensure we're drawing to scale and to establish this foundation of structured accuracy. So I'm going to go to Procreate in my home screen if you're not already there already. I'll go back to my gallery and I'll go to the Import button, and this takes me to my iCloud Drive. And inside the iCloud Drive, I want to go to the iPad for Architects folder that you downloaded for this mini course. And I'll tap that. And inside that, you'll find the grid at 17 by 11 and 1/8 inch scale. So let's tap on that. And what that does is bring the grid in by itself without you having to make any decisions about the size of the canvas. It's just automatically at 17 by 11 at 300 dpi. And now we're going to add a scale to that. So I'll go back to the wrench menu, the so-called actions menu, and I'll hit insert a file. And this time we're already in the iPad for Architects folder, and I'll simply add the 1/8 inch imperial scale. And that comes in. Now you want to be careful not to transform this. You can see the little note there, avoid accidentally transforming the scale because that'll throw it off. But these are coordinated to each other, so if I move the 0 over to this emphasis, you'll see that the emphases correspond to 8 feet, 16 feet, 24, and each tiny grid is 1 foot in 8 scale. So that's how we begin drawing to scale. And at the end here, I'll just tap the Move and Transform tool so the marching ants go away. Then I'll do the quick pinch and return the grid to full size, and we're all set to import the drawing. The next step is to import the elevation and scale it to the grid and the scaled ruler that are already here. So in order to do that, I go back to the wrench menu and I tap Insert a File, and let's go to the east elevation that's inside that folder. And up comes the east elevation. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's covering everything so we can no longer see the grid. And there are a couple of things you can do with that. You could either move the elevation down below the grid like that, or you could remove the background. But let's keep it just below the grid like this because this kind of works well. This also gives us an opportunity to maybe reduce the opacity of the grid a little bit. Depending on your taste, you may be a little distracted by the strength of the grid over the top of your model. So you can certainly use that blending mode icon inside the grid layer to reduce that as much as you want. And I'm going to go down there because I don't like to be distracted by grids while I'm designing in freehand. So I'll close up the layer menu by tapping up there and do my quick pinch to get back. Now the trick here is to use a known dimension in your elevation and then scale that elevation up to the grid and the ruler. So I know for a fact that this door has a 7-foot head height. So what I'm going to do is turn this ruler now. I'll go back to the ruler layer and I'm going to go to the Move and Transform tool and down here to the Rotate 45 degree icon. I'm not a big fan of moving things by hand because my screen happens to get dirty very quickly that way. And I'm just going to tap on this and move it 45 degrees each time until I bring around the 0 end of the scale. And then without touching the scale or without transforming the scale, I'm going to move it up here and see how far off I am. And I'm not too bad. I'm at about 7.6, so that this elevation now has to come down a little bit in size to match that scale ruler. So I'll go here and tap the Move and Transform icon so I'm no longer in danger of moving the scale. And I'll reduce this a little bit so I can see the handles on the elevation. And I will go back to my layers menu to make sure I'm in the elevation layer. And there I am. Now I'll tap the Move and Transform tool, squeeze the elevation in until I can make that 0 and that 7 match exactly. Now this gets a little tricky when your elevation is this big. One option is to crop the elevation so you can get in closer with these handles, but that looks pretty good. I'll show you what it turned out to be. And it's right at 7 now, so it takes a little knack to do that. But once you do that, that elevation is now in scale and corresponds to the grid template and the scale ruler. If you like to add plans to your elevations, plans that are kind of more semi-transparent and elevated above the elevation, this really helps clients understand the relationship between the plan and the elevation. So let's do that now. It's strictly optional, but let's get some practice doing that. And I'll go back to the Actions menu and insert a file. And inside our iPadforArchitects.com folder, you'll see the floor plan, and I'll bring that in. Now, I've already turned that so it has the right relationship to this plan. So this is the east elevation, but obviously the plan is blocking everything below it. So I'm going to use first of all, I'll turn off the Move and Transform tool, and I'm going to use the Selection tool in automatic mode to get rid of the white background around the plan. And you can still see the grid template, but we're on the plan layer, so that shouldn't be affected. So I'll use that selection icon again, automatic, and I'll just tap the screen. And what that does is it selects all the pixels that are the same around that plan. In this case, there are pure white pixels. And as I slide it further, you can see it grabbing more and more pixels. I don't want to grab too many because that'll begin to erode the plan, but somewhere around there looks good. And notice that it's even keeping the little center lines and the other kind of dotted markers that I've left in there. So that's going to be very helpful. And I'll stop about there, and then I'll use the classic 3-finger swipe and swipe down and hit Cut. And away goes that, and now we can see everything under that plan, and the layer menu shows it as being above the elevation. And we can reduce the opacity of that. If that's too strong, we can reduce the opacity by once again hitting the blending mode icon and then sliding the opacity slider down so it has less of an impact. And if I turn off that grid template for the moment, you can see the relationship that you might want to end up with in your final presentation. Now there's one other feature here, which is that the plan may not be exactly corresponding to your elevation. It may have come in at a slightly different size. So let's get some practice just readjusting one more thing, and let's readjust the plan. I'll make the layer menu go away and take a look at this. These piers in the plan are supposed to correspond to these piers on the elevation. So I'm going to use the Move and Transform tool. I'll make sure I'm in that layer. I'm going to use the Move and Transform tool to once again make the plan smaller until it corresponds to these two piers on the elevation. And that's just a little bit of a back and forth wiggling until you get just right. I like to ignore this part of what I'm doing and just keep focusing my attention down here and just kind of massage it back and forth until you get it. And that's close enough, I think. And so now I can turn that off, or rather I can move this back up to where it was. And to do that, I'm going to turn on snapping and magnetics. So here again is snapping down here. I'll tap that, then I'll tap magnetics, and I'm going to move this back up, but I'm going to get ready to place my finger on the screen so that the movement I make gets locked, and you'll see that in a moment. I start moving it, and then I tap my finger down, and you can see the blue line next to my pencil tip over there. That shows me that I'm moving it directly vertically without any side movement. And I'll move it back up to where we had it and let go. And now we're all set. Remember to tap the move icon first and then do your finger. And I need to move it a little bit more because we were zoomed in more. So I'll try once again and move it up. And there we go. I tap the icon again and we're all set to go. Now I've got the SketchUp model and the SketchUp plan to guide me, but I like to mark a few additional things so that I can be completely liberated from all the constraints when I start to freehand design. So one of the things I also like to do is add a horizontal for the window and door heads and the windowsills. And I'll show you how I do that. I'm going to first of all turn back on the grid and the scale ruler. And now I'm going to add a layer above the scale ruler. And I can choose any color, but I'm going to choose red for visibility. And I'll tap back out of my color palette. And I'll come over here and I'll make sure I'm in the Narinder pencil, which is basically a simulated pencil inside the Acres brushes that you all have. I'll choose that. I'll come here and I'll experiment with the size of it. Make sure I can see it clearly. Maybe a little bigger. And now rather than try and draw a perfectly straight line just using my eye, I'm going to go back up and engage Drawing Assist. And so I tap my wrench menu, and now I tap the Canvas tabs, and down here you'll see Drawing Guide. So let's tap that, and what happens is by default it comes up as 2D Drawing Guide. So all of my horizontals and verticals will be locked. But first I have to activate Drawing Guide in the layer that I'm working on. It works on a layer by layer basis. So if I tap the layer now that I've turned on Drawing Guide up here, this layer drop-down menu will show Drawing Assist as a possibility. So I'll tap that and the word assisted appears, so I know that I'm in Drawing Assist. And now any line I make will be restricted to either vertical or horizontal. Or I can also free those lines up by just holding the pencil down at the end of a stroke and then moving it anywhere I want. But let's just quickly put in a couple of lines. One is for the door heads and windows, and the other will be for window sills maybe. And this is again going to keep us liberated and able to just be very spontaneous in the moment. And I'll move those lines over here. And I realize I just picked up the windowsill from SketchUp, which didn't necessarily make sense. It's really this 3-foot windowsill that I want to pay attention to because the SketchUp was more of an intuitive thing. So I'm going to go to the eraser and I'll double check and see what I've chosen. I'm going to go to the flat marker in the eraser and I'm just going to zip by here and erase that line. So that's how your eraser works. Now I'll come back and I'll put in the 3-foot windowsill that I want to always be aware of. Just like that. And now, if I go back to the Actions menu, I can turn off Drawing Guide just so that grid goes away. But the underlying grid template and the fact that this layer is now using Drawing Assist is still in effect. With all these gentle guardrails now in place, I can begin to be completely spontaneous and start designing. And so let's start by turning off a few things. I'm going to turn off the grid. I don't need the grid anymore. I don't need the scale ruler anymore. And I'm going to add a layer of trace. So I'm going to start by